In this super short video, I want to explain the difference between the ViewBag and the ViewData objects. Now, you've probably seen me use the ViewBag object a number of times throughout this series, and I use it to pass data that's unrelated to the model. I passed it from the controller's action result method to the view. So I may have additional information, the title of the page, some data that might be used in a drop-down list box. That stuff's not directly related to the view model, so I can put it into the ViewBag and then retrieve it out of the ViewBag in the view, and it's just a quick, easy way to exchange data between those two concerns in my application. Now, if you look at other examples around the internet and maybe even in books, especially if they're a little bit older, you might see the author use something called ViewData, and you might be wondering what the difference between ViewData and ViewBag is and which one you should be using. Well, it's really simple. The ViewBag is simply a wrapper around the older ViewData. All right, so use ViewBag, and I'll explain why. The ViewBag capitalizes on a new feature of C#, a new feature as of 4.0 called dynamic typing, which allows you to dynamically add properties onto an object at runtime. So if you take a look at this index action result method in my home controller, you can see that I'm creating a property called my dynamic property. Where did I define this property? Nowhere. I defined it right there. By virtue of the fact that I started using the property, it's dynamically bolted onto the side of the ViewBag object, and then at that point I also add data to it, just a simple string in this case. And then whenever I want to retrieve the data out in the view, all I need to do is go ahead and reference the property like I did before. One of the benefits to this is that you do get IntelliSense, although I couldn't get it to work on this example, so I didn't want to demonstrate it, but most of the time you should see IntelliSense and show you all of the properties, dynamic properties that have been added on to your ViewBag. One of the things that you need to know about the ViewBag and ViewData, for that matter, is that this is only valid for this specific request, a single request. So each time that the page is run, it's going to reset this dynamic property. If you need this property to have a little more permanence for a given session or across multiple users, you have other options. Remember, we can go back to ASP.NET Web Forms and talk about the session object, which allows you to temporarily save data during a single session when a user comes to your website. You can also save off data into a more permanent data storage mechanism, a database or a Redis cache or something like that. And then there's also something called temp data that we're going to look at in the next video, which serves a very specific purpose. So the ViewBag, as I said a moment ago, is just a simple wrapper around the older object called the ViewData object. And the ViewData object was the original way that you used to pass data that was unrelated to the model from the controller to the view. It was a simple dictionary. You used a, as you can see here, I'm creating a new key-value pair dictionary. You give it a key and then the value itself. The key is going to be a string, and that's how I'm going to index in and get back at this object. And then the object can be any data type, because as you know, everything inherits from system.object, every other type. In this case, I'm just, again, setting it to a simple string and then retrieving it out in my view, as we'll take a look at in just a moment. Now, in this simple case, I'm just putting a string here in this object, but if you were to use something more complex, then you might have to cast it to that type whenever you're trying to retrieve it out, because you've boxed it into an object. You need to unbox it and get it back to the original type in order to use it. And so that's one of the downsides to using the ViewData object. The ViewBag doesn't require this. Dynamic types are converted implicitly for you. So most people use the ViewBag now, but you'll still see, again, some examples using the ViewData. I recommend you use the ViewBag. If you're still using ViewData behind, you're basically still using ViewData behind the scenes no matter what. It's just that the dynamic properties are more convenient because they show up in IntelliSense, and it's actually more terse than the syntax to actually add a property onto the ViewData, as you'll see here in just a moment. All right, so here's again the simple ViewBag example where I'm setting a new property called my dynamic property to a string. Here I'm retrieving that in order to print it out onto my web page. But I want to point out one other feature of the ViewBag. Notice that in the scaffolded versions of all the pages we've created up to this point, the ViewBag, we create a title at the very top of our scaffolded views, and then we retrieve that title off in the layout page, so the underscore layout.cshtml, and print that out in the title bar. All right, so you can see how that's being utilized already by the people who created the scaffolding. All right, let's take a look then back here at how to use ViewData. In this case, I kind of took the long version so you can see what's actually going on behind the scenes, where you're essentially creating a new key-value pair, which is a dictionary. You pass it in a string as a key, and then you give it a value, whatever value you want, and then you can retrieve it off on the other side. So here I'm actually retrieving the value off using the brackets and then giving it the string. And here's just a second version of that example where I'm avoiding the add and creating a new instance of the dictionary object. Here I'm just going to say ViewData, and then I'm going to give it a string as a key and then set its value, and then I can retrieve it off in the exact same way as I'm doing right here. So my other, I think it's called my other ViewData property. And then just to kind of prove that how this works, in the ViewData, I'm going to take a look at all of the values that it has. So I'm going to look at elements, and let's do a third one here, element at 0, 1, and 2 in the ViewData. So let's run the application to see this working. The only interesting part is here at the bottom. Okay, so you get the values that you would assume to have here at the top. But here, notice that the first value that I pluck off from the ViewData is hello ViewBag, which we set again here as a dynamic property on the ViewBag. All right, so I think that's the only really interesting thing about this example. But now you know the difference. You know everything there is to know about the ViewBag and ViewData. And so the moral of the story is just use the ViewBag, use the dynamic properties. It gives you IntelliSense. You don't have to cast if you're going to give it something more complex than just a string. Okay. All right, so that wraps this up. We're going to talk about temp data, another way of passing data between pages, between layers of separation in your application. We'll see that next. Thanks.